Welcome everybody. Tjitske and me, we would like to welcome you on this webinar on game-based learning, on games, effectiveness, design and research. We would like to start first by sharing screen to announce what we're going to do this afternoon and get to know each other a little bit better. So I'm going to share my screen first. No, you're not seeing my screen yet. Are you seeing my screen? Okay, great. So yes. The title of our talk, our webinar today is Let's Get Serious on the Design, Effectiveness and Research of Serious Games. I'm doing this together with my colleague Tjitske Faber. My name is Mary Dankbaar. We both work at Erasmus University Medical Center in Rotterdam. But before we introduce ourselves a little bit further, I'd like to mention that at the end of August and beginning of September, the annual conference on medical education will be held in Lyon. So it's nice to have a look at. The program for today is that we would first like to share our ideas on the benefits and challenges of serious games. Why would you even use them? And for what type of skills or knowledge? And how are we using games in our medical curriculum? Then we'd like to share some experiences we have on designing serious games and actually implementing this in our curriculum, because the implementation often is a challenge. Then we have a brief breakout session in which we invite you to discuss some questions we've made up and later on share it in the group. And then Tjitske will share what we know in summary on the research on serious games and the research studies we both have been doing in this field. And we'll end up with some conclusions and lessons learned. So that's the program for the next hour. And then we would like to first introduce ourselves and then know a little bit more on you. My name is, as I said, Mary Dankbaar. I'm an educational advisor and an educational scientist also in my background. And I am program manager in blended learning and innovation. And in my last years working at the medical center, I've developed together with game companies several games and also implemented them in our curriculum, and also did research on the effectiveness of games. Tjitske, would you introduce yourself?
Sure, great to be here. Hi, my name is Tjitske Faber. I'm an anesthesia trainee or registrar. And I am also a PhD candidate with Mary as my supervisor, and my research focuses on finding indicators for effectiveness in serious games.
Okay, and I'd like you to invite to answer the question in the poll.
I see Crystal has a hand up. You have a question?
Yeah, Crystal?
I think you're muted.
Yeah.
I'm only introduction. I'm from Chile. I'm related with the Department of Medical Education in the University of Chile. And our interest is because we are just beginning with two of other students from the Master of Medical Education that want to make their thesis related with gaming. So we are the three now in this group to learn more about gaming, but we don't have a big experience. Only we want to try it.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good reason to attend this webinar, Crystal. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And I see you're with a large group of people who are very interested in knowing more about games. So that's very good to hear. I see that most of the participants already have filled in the poll, and the majority, 2/3 of you, are interested in knowing more about games. A few are doing research, and one person actually is using serious games in educational work. So that's no people looking for funds. That's interesting to see that you really want to get to know more about games. Okay, thank you for answering the questions. I'll close the poll now. So we will try to get you to know the games better, when to use them and how to use them.
Mary, just up front, maybe we should explain, if you have a question during the meeting, feel free to type your question in the chat. One of us will be keeping an eye out for questions that require interruption. We will have a lot of time for discussion in the breakout rooms and afterwards. So if your question can wait, please do so, but feel free to type it in the chat as it comes up.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Tjitske. So the breakout room is more for sharing your experiences and discussion, but if the slides raise any questions, feel free to ask. So what do we see as the main benefits and challenges? Why would you even use serious games? What are the benefits? Well, they're a very interesting, flexible way of learning procedural skills. Psychomotor skills are more complex to learn using games. There are a few games who actually do that, but most games focus on procedural skills, and they offer experiential form of skills training. Sorry, my slide is going on its own. And realistic tasks can be presented in games. That's very interesting also. You can really simulate a certain environment and present them. And games are expensive, but once they are developed, you can use them for a large group of people. There are also some challenges. The costs are high for development, and you have to really look carefully at what are the tasks that you present in a game. So what's the challenge that you have to solve, and are they really well aligned to the learning goals? You can have a lot of fun tasks which are not really well aligned to the learning goals. And there isn't very much research to help you design a good game. So there are lots of choices to make, and there's little research on that. And implementation is something to look carefully at also, because if you only focus on designing a nice game, then you probably will find that it doesn't fit in the curriculum. So that's something to really look closely at from the beginning. So in summary, for us, from our medical center, in our view, also looking at what we know of games, they offer an interesting format for engaged, authentic skills training. You can really practice the skills training that you're focusing on. And we use them specifically for procedural, critical skills, such as acute care and interprofessional teamwork skills. How are we using games in our curriculum? We will show two examples, one of the ABCDE game, that's a game on acute care, and the second one is on teamwork. We use a blended design. Students start with studying their E module at home on the ABCDE method, so it's explaining on the method with interactive questions, but it's basically text, questions, videos, and then they play the game, and they are in a virtual emergency room in that game, and they have to apply this skill. I'll show you more about the game in a minute. So they do that at home. They have different scenarios and are applying this skill. The learning goal is to train them to assess critically ill patients and to stabilize them in this game. And then they come to our institution and do a scenario training and are also assessed. So this is a very flexible way of learning this skill. They can do it at home at any time they want and actually experiencing what it is to apply that skill. They find it also very engaging. How does the game look like in more detail? You have, as I said, virtual emergency room. If you look closely, for instance, with a lamp at the pupil reflection, you will see a pupil reflection which is corresponding to the condition of the patient. And also you see on the monitor, for instance, the oxygen level, the blood pressure, etc. We have 6 scenarios with 6 critically ill patients. And in this virtual emergency department, you have all the instruments that you need. And there is a very high level of interactivity because there is a physiological model working behind this game. It was also accredited for continual medical education. I'll have a brief demo of the game just to give you an impression. So I can get the stethoscope with my computer mouse and put it on the breast of the patient. I will hear realistic heart and lung sounds, and I have to interpret these lung sounds. And I get, for instance, a lamp and look at the pupil open the mouth and see whether the A is safe, so whether nothing is blocking the airway. I can suck anything that is blocking the airway. I can grab a lamp and check the pupil reflection, and I have to interpret it whether there's a problem in the D for disability. And so, and I also can get medication, any medication that would be available on an emergency department. And I see in a monitor the condition of the patient. So this is how it works. And for every action and every click I do in this game that is registered and is connected to the game score and also the feedback, whether I made the right choices, I didn't forget anything, that's all translated to the feedback and the game score. Second example is on...
Mary, let me interrupt you for a moment. I see Crystal, you still have a hand up. Do you still have a question, or is that your hand from previously? You're muted.
Crystal, you're muted. Sorry. When we are talking about gaming, it is necessary that we use electronic device. Can we also use real gaming using games that interact, that we can have interaction through from the students.
So there's several options. So the examples that Miri is showing us right now, the ABCD sim game is a single player 2D simulation game. I see Majid Ali asks, can we call it a virtual simulation? Yes, you can. This is a virtual environment that you are interacting with. Although the term virtual reality now applies to something else, but this is a virtual simulation environment. I'm not familiar with the term VPL. If you could explain that, that would be helpful. So to answer Crystal's question, there's also examples of running tabletop games, board games, card games for specific learning goals. We will not be discussing these, but they are definitely options. And there can be very good options to try a certain way of testing whether your learning problem is fit to be used in a game environment. Yeah. Virtual patient learning. We also use virtual patients at the Erasmus MC. We do not consider them games as such, I think, Miri, but we do use them. And well, there is a patient in this game, so I suppose you could use the term.
Yeah, I think the difference is that in these virtual patients cases or virtual patient simulation, you might call them, is more text-based. So a patient is presented, and this can be a video, so that can be quite realistic. And then you have to click on all kinds of options for the physical examinations, and you get text feedback on what you would find examining the back of the patient or the head of the patient. And you can click options in the history taking, and you would get verbal answers, what you would find in history taking. So it's really very text oriented, but it's about one particular patient with a specific complaint. So that makes it a simulated patient. And in this type of games, it's much more realistic and not really text-based. As you saw, you can move your mouse and you will hear actual sounds, no description of sounds, but actual sounds, etc.
Thank you.
Okay. Then I'll move to the next example, the second game we're using in our curriculum. And that's the game on teamwork skills. And the learning goal of that team is for students to know what the most important teamwork principles are and to exercise in using them. So they study an e-module at home. They acquire knowledge about the teamwork principles. I'll explain more about the principles. Then they play a game. They can either do that at home, because they can play that on their phone. You see an example of 4 students here playing the game, or they come to our institution and play it over there. They do it in groups of 4. They all have different roles, so that's why it's a game in interprofessional teamwork. And they apply these skills in the game. So it's a virtual patient scenario, and on top of that, they have to apply teamwork skills. Then they come to our institution and do a scenario training. And that's again a virtual patient, sorry, not a virtual, that's a case, again, a patient scenario. So a patient with an acute complaint, but they have to apply teamwork skills in improving the condition of this patient. And of course, we can then ask them to apply the teamwork skills on a little bit more complex level compared to the game that they played on their phone. And then they get a scenario assessment also at our institution. So this is what the game looks like. They exercise skills in 3 virtual patient scenarios. You can have an impression of the scenarios over here. 4 different roles. The role of the young doctor, the resident, the nurse, the student nurse, and also the trainee, the student doctor. Communication is done through one-to-one chat and also through team chat. And there is a debrief added in the game where they can reflect as a group of 4 on their teamwork. I'll briefly show you some, I'll give you an impression of what the game looks like. There's no sound, so I'll explain a little bit about it. The game is in Dutch. And here you see the 4 scenarios, Mrs. Bloemen, Mrs. Beesmer. This is an introduction of the scenario. And you select a role, the nurse role, the resident role, and play from those 4 different perspectives. You have access to the patient's file, so you can always look up what was found. This is the one-to-one chat they have from one role to the other. And they can also choose a chat as a team. That's called the team up chat. So they press this button and then they can talk together as a team and decide what to prioritize or what the next steps should be. So that's a very brief impression of the game. And there are no questions at this point, right? So I'll share our experiences in the design process. How does the development of such a game proceed? First step you always take is to define the learning goals. So what are the goals that this game should achieve, and where in the curriculum does it fit? What did students already do? What do they know? And what do they do next? Then there is the phase of concept development, and you see a picture of this, how this was done in the team up game. That's a brainstorm with content experts from our institution. So they might be doctors or experts on how to teach teamwork, and also experts from the game company, interaction designers, and also some educational scientists. Then the design process starts. So the game company presents an actual design, how to do the interaction design, what type of scenario would be appropriate, etc. Then they develop a prototype on paper with a specific scenario and test it with the users. So they don't program it yet, but it's just to test the interface and the look and feel. And then if that works out well, and it can be changed, of course, they develop a digital prototype and test it. And then we, together with the game company, develop all the scenarios. Because in the scenarios itself, you of course need a lot of content knowledge. In our case, this was developed by 2 doctors and in a close collaboration with the game company. And then it is implemented in the game. So these are the 6 basic steps. And then if it's finished, the testing process is very important. There are always bugs and always ways in which the game doesn't work properly. So you have to find all these bugs so that the game company can debug them. And when the game is all set and it works well, then it can be implemented in the curriculum, and it should be evaluated to see whether it works as intended. Here's an impression of the testing, the paper testing. You see here 4 papers with the task that the 4 different roles, the doctor, the nurse, the student nurse, could do. And 2 students are doing these tasks. They grab these tasks and perform them, and they use a digital communication channel called Slack to do the one-to-one chat. So that part was digital, but the actual part of the game, so what happened to the patient and the tasks that were connected to it, that was done on paper. And we could very well see how that worked out for them, what they understood and what they didn't understand. And it could be adjusted and then translated to the digital game format. So what are really important successful factors for implementation? It's important to define the critical skills in the curriculum because a game is quite expensive. It works, in our opinion, best to define critical skills because they get really a lot of attention in the curriculum, and usually they are also relevant for a large group of learners. And it's also crucial to involve stakeholders from the start, not just the teachers who are involved in that part of the curriculum, but also, for instance, the program director, that he or she knows about this innovative way of learning and knows about the benefits and also the process of development. We also found that it's important to take time to find good partners with relevant expertise. There are, for instance, a lot of game companies who have a lot of experience in developing games, but not for learning. If you have the experience in games for fun, in shooter games, that's a totally different way of designing games. So look at relevant expertise and create a team where all the different types of expertise is combined. So of course, a game company who can develop the game for you, the content experts, so the doctors or nurses that you need for the scenarios, and the educational advisors to look at the learning goals and to see whether the game is aligned, the game tasks are aligned with these learning goals. Then, as I said, testing prototypes is very important with potential users. Do they understand it? Do they think it's engaging? Are they able to solve the scenarios? These are all very important questions to ask them. And then when it's finished, evaluation is of course important to see whether it really works well in the curriculum, and it's whether the connection to the other parts is done well. So this was a lot of information. Before we move to the breakout rooms, are there any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, Eliza.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Eloisa, and I'm actually one of the students from Professor Hanne. And I would like to know, because there is two types of games there. One is like a virtual game where the student works alone, basically, and the other one is a team group. I would think that maybe the group activity could help more to learn with this like social theories, you know. But then the virtual game where the student works alone, have you any type of like evidence of the learning process? Because I have developed some little stuff, you know, in the gaming, in gamification, more than like virtual reality, but still the student works alone. And I have read that the cognitive level of games can be a bit basic, like with this cognitive theories and behaviorism, you know. So is there any evidence?
Sorry, I didn't get your question quite clearly. Is there any evidence for?
For the cognitive level in which the students work? Because I have read that when they work alone, like and like the virtual reality game, the cognitive level they develop is like a little more basic than when they work in a group.
Okay, now it's clear. Tjitske, I try to answer this, and you,
Sure.
you add if you want. I think, well, if you have a multiplayer game, you have to play it in groups. So then there is no choice, and that's the whole idea of teamwork, of course. But if you have a game like the ABCD Sim that I just showed, and there are lots of others where which you can play individually, then it's always a good thing to do that, for instance, in pairs. Because especially if the game is a bit difficult for you, if you can help each other and discuss options, that always helps. So that would mean that you can learn more from a game if somebody helps you and you can discuss options and then decide. I don't know of any research saying that the challenge is lower if you play a game individually compared to playing it in a group. I think that very much depends on the type of tasks, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so if I can chime in, I think it really depends on what you're trying to teach or train. And obviously from a constructivist point of view, it helps if there's more people involved in learning. But as Miri said, a single player game doesn't necessarily mean that you are on your own. It's just a task that you can perform on your own. And I think especially the ability to practice over and over again without involvement from teachers or other students is one of the reasons that we think games can be of added value in a curriculum. Also with commercial off-the-shelf games, there's huge trends where people play a game, but there's also large online communities of people helping each other out helping other people find out where to go, what to do, why does this work, why does this not work. So I think whether a game is single or multiplayer doesn't really cover whether or not you can achieve social learning through the game. And whether you want that depends on your learning goal, I think.
Okay, any more questions?
Chat's clear. So either we are very clear or we have lost everyone already. All right, the question,
Okay.
Camilo.
Yeah.
You may have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, there.
Yes, better.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Camilo. I'm from Chile. I have a question. Do you have any possible means of your patient when you are in the virtual simulation? Your patient can die if you do take a wrong decision. You give him the wrong doses of epinephrine, for example. Can he decompensate, die, or you have to react to the effects of the drugs?
Shall I take this one, Mary?
Yeah.
Well, this is a specific question for the ABCD sim game. Mary
Yes.
mentioned that there's a physiological model behind the scenes running the ABCD sim game, and it responds to exactly what you say. If I would give my patient epinephrine, their blood pressure rises, their heart rate rises, and you would have to try that. I had a student in one of my research who felt that he had to give atropine for something, and then the patient had a very low heart rate, but the patient does not die in the simulator, but you get a message with a red screen saying your supervisor came in or the resuscitation team took over. So
Okay.
they do get a message like you really should not have done that, but the patient does not die, and then they can click restart.
Okay.
And they're still
They
there.
don't die, but if I gave him the wrong dose or the wrong medication, the patient get the effects of that.
Yes, if you would give
Yeah.
them a lot of morphine, for example, they will become drowsy. If it's too much, their airway will block.
Okay.
So it's a really sophisticated simulator. This is specific for the ABCD sim game. Let me be clear on that. If other games could have that, but it's not all games do. I think it's a very useful feature of this game.
Thank you.
And also the patient can, in one scenario, the patient can, within the ABCDE sim, the patient can get an insult. And then
A seizure.
Seizure. Sorry.
Seizure.
Seizure. And then that's quite stressful, I think, for the players, because the patients start shaking and you really have to do something. So yeah, and if you give the good medication, then it will stop. So it's really motivating.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Maha Farid?
Yes, thank you. My name is Maha Farid and I'm from Egypt. My questions for you, actually there are two questions. First one, are these games used only for educational purposes or you use them for assessment too? That is one. The second question is my idea about gaming from previous lectures or conferences. The people who play the games get rewards. This is how they feel that they are playing. If you think about games, like video games that everybody's playing, they always get challenged all the time and they get rewards by virtual lives or something like this. Where is the concept of rewarding in these games if they are not used for assessment? I hope my questions are clear. Thank you.
Okay. Shall I answer the question on assessment?
Sure.
Yeah, we get that question a lot. A lot of people are interested in the possibilities of games for assessment, and it can be done. For instance, the ABCD sim game has 6 scenarios, and you could say, okay, you can train with 5 scenarios, and the 6th scenario we will use as assessment. And the score is important to decide whether you're proficient in this skill or not. But if you want to do that, you will have to validate that scenario, because assessment is connected to decisions probably. So you have to really be sure that what you are measuring in this scenario is saying something about the skill being present or absent, which means you have to test it whether students having a high score are also performing in the top level in a scenario setting, and students who are performing poor in the game, are they also performing poor in a scenario setting? So you have to validate it, because the game is another environment and you're not sure whether it is representative for the actual situation in which you want them to perform that skill. So and whether you can use it for assessment depends on the result of that validation. Does that answer your first question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. And the second question was about rewarding. Tjitske, can you try to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So we're actually coming back to that after the breakout rooms, because it ties into to a model of motivation, and the rewards that you mentioned, like getting things, gaining things, points, badges, anything, mostly fall into the extrinsic motivation category. And there's also ways to tap into intrinsic motivation. And I think if we view a game as an opportunity to practice a task, so as a way for a learning task to be presented to a learner, and by playing the game repeatedly, they can develop mastery. Well, that's one of the ways that intrinsic motivation can be sustained. So there's this line between Eloisa just mentioned gamification, where you give people points or badges for just things that they should be doing. That's really mostly extrinsic motivation focused. And if you're more looking at mastery, achievements, and also the social aspect that was just mentioned, then you're more on the intrinsic motivation side of things. So I think that's really important to keep in mind when talking about games. You really want that intrinsic motivation. You want this game to be engaging and motivating by itself, not because you get points, because points wear off. People get bored with points.
Okay. I think it would be interesting that you share your information on games in groups in the breakout room. I think we could form 4 groups. You're with 28 people, I believe. 27. Yeah, we could use 4 groups, and please discuss in your subgroup. Gordon will point you to 4 groups in at random combination. Please discuss 2 questions, and you can also make a choice between them if you want. What are critical success factors in your own context for design or implementation? So if you would use a game, maybe a game you buy, you take a license for, or a game you develop yourself, what would be critical success factors in using them and implementing them? And how can you make sure they are met? Okay, now we are at the part of the agenda dealing with the research on the effectiveness of serious games. And I'd like to ask Tjitske to take over.
Yeah, could you share the slides again, or you want me to?
You don't see the slides?
I don't see slides.
Oh, sorry.
Is this just me? No.
Okay.
Camilo doesn't see slides either. Thank you. It's just great how good we've gotten on that sign language in the last few years, isn't it? All right. And
Are
now
you seeing it now?
Yeah, I see your PowerPoint. Yes, that's wonderful.
Okay,
thanks so much. All right, so just to give you guys a quick overview, like I think Miri's done a great job at explaining how games are very promising and versatile tools that you could use in education. But well, as we're from medical education, we like to have evidence for all the things that we do, and also in education. So just to talk you through a few of the main results of research on effectiveness of games, because there was a question on that as well before the breakout rooms. Systematic review studies have found mixed results, ambiguous results on general on the effectiveness of games. And you can imagine that that this may also due to the fact that there are so many different games and types of games and ways to assess their effectiveness. It's hard to do a very rigorous systematic review. There's actually quite decent evidence that games to train psychomotor skills, like the games used in laparoscopy simulators, improve surgeon skills. So there's even hospitals that have mandated the use of these games. There's evidence on technology-enhanced simulation programs to improve knowledge and skills, so that's positive on our side. But we strongly feel that more research is needed to really assess what features of serious games influence effectiveness and performance and motivation. Now it's just, there's so many different things out there, it's hard to say, if I want to design a game, what do I do? So just gonna go over this real quick. Things that you hear mentioned a lot talking about when you're talking about research into game-based learning. Flow, I hope some people are familiar with the term. That's when you are really engaged in a task because the challenge really matches your skills and you are so involved that nothing else seems to matter. You're just working on the activity, and games have been known to evoke the state of flow. And this is thought to be a positive for games as a learning device. On the bottom left, you see problem-centered experiential learning. In our research, we use the cognitive load theory or four-component instructional design to guide the way that games design, because if you are using a game as an instructional tool, then you should definitely go and use instructional design principles. So that's if you want to develop, I would go from there. Game developers don't often start with instructional design, they start from engagement. So then the self-directed learning theory comes in, Ryan and DC, not very new, hopefully familiar to a lot of people. Motivation stems from a combination of autonomy, competence, relatedness, as mentioned before the break, gaining mastery and doing tasks and getting better at things is a really big motivator that games can evoke. So keep that in mind when you're designing something. This is research from Mary's grad student studies, PhD studies, investigating the ABCD sim game, where we found that playing the game improved procedural skills in doctors. So they knew what to do in emergencies better than doctors who had not played the ABCD sim game. For students, we didn't find this difference, but they did like it and they did play it a lot, over 2 hours, compared with the group that just had case-based, text-based cases. So we figured that some groups benefit from the open environment that the simulation game provides, but other groups do not. Maybe it's too complex for the novices. I heard someone mention high fidelity. Not sure if it was in the breakout room or just before in the plenary session, but high fidelity is really something you want to stay away from for novices. They have enough trouble as it is, but then again, experts need the higher fidelity to really get into their learning experience. So keep your audience and your goals in mind. But that's what I said. The instructional format should match your learner. So even though a game may be found motivating, which is the question most often asked when evaluating any instructional novelty, this may not mean that this is also effective. So keep if you're researching games, try to go up a level on your Kirkpatrick effectiveness outcomes. This is from my own research. We used 4CID theory, as I said, to redesign the ABCD sim game by adding well-funded support. We looked at what do students click and how stressed do they get while playing by measuring heart rate and skin conductance. And we try to figure out if any of these things can tell us when they are playing the game, whether or not this is effective. Because as I said, some students benefit, some don't. If you can adapt your game and your support to match what your learner needs, it would follow logically that the game would be more effective as a training tool. So we did find some. We found that the structure they use, so the systematicity they use in approaching the problem, can predict their performance, the thoroughness, whether they do all the things that are necessary. And for stress measures, we found skin conductance and valence to be predictive measures. So these are things that you could implement if you want to create an adaptive game. And that's what we're actually trying to figure out right now. So I will get back to you on that next year. The team up research, you want me to take this as well, Mary?
Well, we could also skip this because of time. Yeah.
So in the team up game, remember that we mentioned they chat with each other, and we looked at if they are actually communicating using the principles that we want them to use in effective teamwork, and they do. And there was also a difference between novices and experts, so that was a really nice way to look at the effectiveness of this game. So wrapping this up in 1 minute. Mary, can you scan the chat for questions that we definitely can't miss?
I will.
And then let me go to the conclusions. So I hope we've demonstrated that we think you can use serious games for important training needs, such as critical skills. If you're developing a game, involve all the stakeholders that you need during the development, not afterwards once you have your finished product. Take the time in the development process to create a good team with representation from game design, content experts, educationalists. You really need everyone to chime in. Test again with your users, not just with yourself, because everything will be obvious to you and not to them. Apply instructional design principles when designing your game because you want it to be instructive. And well, not for everyone maybe, but research on effectiveness and design choices is definitely something that we feel this field needs to make our designs well thought out and more effective from the start, not just a jumble of products that we can't systematically review.
Okay, thank you, Tjitske. So 4 o'clock sharp, at least in the Netherlands, not for everyone, of course. If you want to get in touch, you can. In the chat, I'll stop sharing. If anyone needs to go, you're free to go, of course. In the chat, I saw are there facilitators assigned during gameplay? Any research on the role of facilitators? Well, we don't assign facilitators to gameplay because one of the main advantages is that you don't need them and that students are flexible in when and how to play. And myself, I'm not familiar with any research on that.
Yeah, there's actually some board and card games that are used by a facilitator hosting a session, for example, for that's not medical education specifically, for recognizing children with high sensitivity, I think. There's also a board game for triage in the emergency department. And with things like that, you need someone to run the game. So and the question research on the role of facilitators, not that I'm familiar with, would be interesting to look at. Yeah.
If you allow me, I just pop in. I was using a game and I was facilitating a game. I was observing the student, are they doing the games and seeing who's the student not performing well. And I tend to push those who are not performing. This was one of my roles, if you can say it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And for anybody, after this webinar, there is an evaluation form, so please fill that in. In the chat, you find the link. Let me see whether we have covered all the questions.
And question from
test effectiveness. Yeah, well, that's a very important question when you are interested in research and effectiveness. So you have to compare students who played the game and didn't play the game, or health professionals, but even better, compare different design choices so that we know more about what makes games effective. And that's really hardcore research you need to do. Tjitske, you want to add on that?
Well, yeah, that's for design of the research to test effectiveness. And if your question, Eloisa, is about the outcome measure, it really depends on your subject matter or what you are trying to teach. So I would always advise to try and go beyond just, did you like to play this game? Because they will often have liked to play the game, but try to find some way of measuring whether there was any knowledge transfer or any creation of cognitive strategies, something like that.
Yeah, so look at the way you would measure skills or knowledge with any other format and know whether they actually learn something. Okay, if there are no more questions, I think it's a good time to wrap up. 4 minutes past 4. We'd like to thank you a lot for your attention. I really liked answering all those questions and the interest that you demonstrated in games. And well, it's good to see, Tjitske, isn't it, that a lot of people share our interest and passion. So thanks a lot.